Hi, welcome to the Catholic Corner. I'm Monsignor Walter Nolan. You know, the abuse and exploitation of children by trusted adults is horrific, wrong, and criminal. This is a statement in 2002 from USA Today by the Most Reverend Archbishop of St. Paul in Minneapolis, Harry Flynn. Archbishop Flynn is the chairman of the U.S. Bishops' Ad Hoc Committee on Sexual Abuse. You know, when I talk like this at the beginning of our program, I also talk with the pain that can be in our hearts as church, but the pain that's in our hearts for so many victims of abuse. We want to share the next couple of programs to talk about this, to allow ourselves to share not only the pain, but hopefully some of the healing process and the love of our church and the love of our God and our families. You know, in Dallas in 2002, a few years ago, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops drafted a document in response to our crisis of sexual abuse of children within our own Catholic Church. The document was entitled Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People. It had three kind of central tasks to it. One, to assist each in implementing safe environment programs designed to ensure necessary safety and security for all children as they participate in our church and religious activities. Second, to develop an appropriate compliance audit mechanism so we can check on how things are going, to assist the bishops in adhering to the responsibilities set forth in that charter. And lastly, to prepare a public annual report describing the compliance of each diocese to the Charter's provision. In addition to this, each diocese in the United States has a Victims Assistance Coordinator to help the victims in making a formal complaint of abuse, in arranging personal meetings with the bishop or the bishop's representative, and for obtaining support for their own specific needs. That's what we're going to be talking about. It's a lot of pain, but there's also, I think, a lot of growth. A lot of good people have spent an awful lot of time in trying to reach out to those who have been hurt badly. And because of that hurt, we all hurt, because we are really brothers and sisters. So when we reach out to the victims of child sexual abuse in the church, we're going to ask, what is the church doing? And specifically, how can our diocese, the Diocese of Trenton, keep responding in these areas to make that growth real? Many of you watch the show a lot. And you know that I'm the pastor of St. Paul's in Princeton, in our own diocese. But I'm also the Victims Assistance Coordinator for the Diocese of Trenton. But I have marvelous people working and helping with me. We'll probably go back in a little bit of the history to show you how we responded to this a good bit ago, and how we want to keep responding to this, not only crisis, but how we can respond to the blessedness, hopefully, that comes from all of our pain together, all of our prayer together, and all of our work together. With me is just two marvelous people who love young people, who love people that need us. Maureen Fitzsimmons is the Associate Victim Assistant Coordinator. And I kind of say that a little slowly because Maureen, I think, does tremendous part of what we do, and we should take away that assistant kind of title, I think. Maureen is also the Program Director for Catholic Charities in Monmouth and Ocean County. Maureen, thanks for being with us on the Catholic Corner. We also have Steve Goodell, a marvelous young man, a family man. Steve's a lawyer. Steve's a legal advisor. And you know, sometimes you say words like that, legal advisor, and it kind of sounds like, you know, this is what the law says. Steve Goodell is a man of great faith. Steve Goodell is a man of great family and love. Steve Goodell gives us his heart every time we share what we do together. Steve, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Okay, there's a little bit of a long introduction, but Maureen and Steve, we're just so blessed to have you and have you on our program. Let's start maybe from, I don't know if I'd say the beginning, but we're going to jump right in. You know, we all work with victims. Let's talk about, what is it? What's a victim's assistance coordinator?
Well, a victim assistance coordinator and his associate are many things. I think that the primary mission or ministry that we have is to reach out to those victims who are in pain, and in some way to walk the journey with them, hopefully the journey to healing. And I think, prescinding from all the other things that we do, I think that's our primary goal.
And I think, Maureen, that knowing that we've done this together for a good little bit of time now, and you and I have talked about how we feel the pain and how we try our very best to do that little healing process. Not always easy.
No,
when someone's hurt that deeply, it's not magic. You know, and would that it was. You know, we could almost, you know, just say, okay, but we know it takes a long time. And sometimes we walk a line. Hopefully the victims understand that we are on their side, and we do want to bring about some goodness and wholeness for them. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. Sure. Steve, I hope you don't mind me the way I introduced you, but you are a very caring, beautiful guy, and can't say enough about the work you do for us. But, you know, is that a good term? You're a legal advisor for us. I mean, to me, you're also part of the heart of the work we do.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Legal advisor, I think, is as good as any. I've been involved with this issue with the church and with the diocese for about 4 or 5 years now. And I've played a lot of different roles. When the abuse crisis first really came to national attention after Boston in 2002, the big issue was trying to make sure that the Diocese of Trenton and the other dioceses in New Jersey had adequate response mechanisms in place. And so, as you know, we did have some very good procedures. I think that New Jersey and the Diocese of Trenton were ahead of their time. They had procedures that were put in place back in 1993. But we took those procedures and went a step further. And we developed procedures that I think are working now and working well to make sure that the diocese is responsible when it gets a complaint of abuse. So that's one thing that I did. I helped to create some of those procedures that are now in place. I also, as you know, I give the Diocese Review Board advice when they need it, make sure that legal procedures are being properly followed. And also, in the event that there's a complaint that has to go to court, I can give the diocese advice and actually represent it in court. So it's a lot of different things, and it's very interesting work.
You mentioned the Diocesan Review Board, and you also mentioned Steve and Maureen, as you know, that some of the work we've done really was going back into the early 90s. And I think that was a great benefit, and some marvelous people helped us way back then. Maybe we can just let our audience know a little bit about this review board. I don't know if they understand completely what that's all about.
Okay. I'm glad that you mentioned that a lot of the activity from the Diocese of Trenton predates the charter. And at one time we were called the Diocesan Response Team. We were the DRT. After the charter was promulgated, Bishop Smith decided to do several things. And one of the things he did was expand the scope and the size of the Diocesan Review Board. The board now acts as a consultative body to the bishop. It is composed of 9 people, and in the policy, which we were reviewing earlier, it says that these people need to be people of integrity and good judgment in full communion with the Roman Church. So currently we have 9 of those persons sitting on the review board, and the board meets on a monthly basis. Steve is our legal advisor. He is present at our meetings. And although we are slated to meet monthly, if an emergent issue comes on the table, we will meet instantly. So it's important for people to know that the review board responds and is there at the moment and at the ready to help anyone who's in pain.
One of the changes that I saw happen, in 2002 or right about that time, going back to the early 90s, and Steve, you were a great asset to us in this, is the prosecutor's office and how we deal with the prosecutor's office and how we respond to them. Maybe you could just kind of bring us up to date on that, Steve.
Sure. In 2002, when the bishops created their charter, there were a lot of reforms that were instituted. One of them, as Maureen has talked about, is the review board. The review board was very important, I think, in making sure so that everybody out there knows that these matters are being reviewed by a body that is not just priests or hierarchy of the church, but rather there are laymen involved, people who are expert in this subject. The review board in Trenton has retired judges on it. It's got psychologists on it, retired FBI officer, retired businessman. So it's a full group of people who are representative of the community. Another of the key reforms was that we would have an open process with the civil authorities, and that in New Jersey means the local prosecutor's offices. So that if, for instance, there's a claim of abuse and it comes to the diocese, or if anybody at the diocese or any of its schools finds out about a claim of abuse, the obligation is to immediately report it to the local prosecutor's office. And that is whether or not we think there is merit to it. In other words, we're not going to make a review of it. We are going to immediately take that report and turn it over to the local prosecutors. I am the liaison with the prosecutor's offices, so when these reports come in, eventually I get a telephone call, and my next call is to the local prosecutor, whether it be in Ocean County, Monmouth County, Mercer County, or Burlington County, the 4 counties in the Diocese of Trenton. And I think that we have excellent working relationships now with the prosecutors in each of those counties, and it pays off for both the prosecutor and the diocese. If we have a complaint, we know, and anybody out there knows, that it's going to be reviewed by a civil authority.
And that's true no matter when the complaint occurred, in a sense, so that even if it happened a while ago, we still let the prosecutor know that this has come to our attention.
Right. There are a couple of reasons for doing that. And I think it's important to say that the vast majority of the cases we get are very old, 20 years or more. So they're not cases where there may be a concern about anything ongoing. We turn those matters over to the prosecutor. The prosecutor will always investigate, always contact the victim, always see whether there is an abuser who is out there that something needs to be done with. But we'll handle those cases and determine whether or not there's a statute of limitations that would preclude or prevent prosecution. For cases, and again, this is very, very rare, but if there is an event that's ongoing, we have an agreement with the prosecutor's offices that we will tell them about the complaint and give them an opportunity to investigate so that they can take the proper care to develop a case if there is a case there.
And actually, sometimes you even have to call a prosecutor outside of our state if something happened in another state jurisdiction. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's right. In fact, the goal is to make sure that the civil authorities know about these things. And that sometimes takes us far and wide. If we get a report that there has been abuse in another state, we won't hesitate to call the prosecuting authorities in that other state. And actually, sometimes it surprises them.
Let's talk about the bishops, if we can, for a little bit. The bishops' response to the charter in 2002, and how the United States bishops came to the conclusion that they needed to write this charter. What was, from your background and knowledge of this, how did you see the bishops coming together to make sure that a charter was presented?
Well, from my perspective, I think that many dioceses were ahead of the game as we were, but there was no cohesiveness about it, and the charter somehow brought it all together. The best best practices of dioceses within the United States. And it also gives each diocese a format for how best to handle these cases again, in a very pastoral way.
So, okay, certain policies were put in place. What would happen if a complaint comes in, who it goes to, et cetera. And then even some policies on what we must do as far as not only the victim, but also the perpetrator, what's got to be done or not done, working with the authorities. Let's for our audience, how are complaints handled? And let's go back to somebody wants to make a complaint. Who do they go to? What should they do? And then what happens after that?
Okay, well, all of this is on our diocesan website, incidentally, how to file a complaint. But for the record, a complaint of sexual abuse by a clergy member is reported to our Vicar General, who is Monsignor Gregory Vaughn.
Okay, could I just stop you, Maureen? Does it have to be a complaint by a clergy person, or could it be a complaint of any adult working for the church or in the church, or is there any, or are there two separate lines here, or is it just the one line?
No, it's all inclusive.
Okay,
good.
And
I'm glad you corrected me, because I think in terms of clergy abuse, because that's what we've been working with. So Monsignor Vaughn calls a couple of people, several people. He calls Steve, so Steve can move forward and do his thing with the prosecutor's office. He calls you, you call me, and the process begins.
Let me just take it up from there. I reach out to the prosecutor. The prosecutor will do his investigation. Sometimes that prevents us from doing work, but more often than not, we continue on with our work. Your office, Maureen's office, contacts the victim, invites the victim to our review board, where the victim can come in and tell this group of lay people what it is that happened. If there is an alleged abuser who is still functioning, then we have to take action there. We have to notify that person, give that person an opportunity to come in, tell his side of the story. And then the review board makes findings of fact and makes recommendations to the bishop about what ought to be done. All this time, the prosecutors are determining whether or not there's action that they can take. Let's take a hypothetical case then, the next step. If it is found that there is abuse, and if there is an abuser who is a priest, then we would make the recommendations to the bishop, and the bishop would then have to make a determination of what to do. Remove the person from the ministry, remove the person temporarily, report the case on to Rome. Some of these cases are very old, and one of the things that the bishops did in 2002 was they asked Rome whether they could continue to prosecute cases that are very old. And Rome gave them special dispensation and they said, yes, you can present those cases to us. So even if a case is very old, the bishop can send it to Rome, and at the Vatican, they will make a determination whether or not there should be a hearing there in Rome, or they can send it back to the local diocese for a hearing. Those hearings then have to proceed in accordance with canon law, which is the law of the church that's been established for hundreds of years. And then the outcome of a canon law hearing determines whether or not that particular person can continue to be a priest or not. That in a nutshell is the policy. The whole time we have to be very careful about the privacy of the victim. We have to be careful about the privacy of the accused. We have to take the right steps in the event there is a parish that's involved. We have to notify the parish if we're removing the priest, for instance. And then we have to deal with that, and people like you and Maureen have to go to the parish and do what's appropriate to help counsel people and tell them what's going on. So it's very difficult, and quite frankly, every case is dealt with a little differently because every fact pattern is a little different, but those are some of our concerns.
So it can't be just like a ABCD and we just do it all, because as you said, every case could be a little different. Sometimes they're so old, somebody's even not even living anymore, and that gets very difficult. You can't even talk to somebody about it. Also, I think, Steve and Maureen, there are times when the local authorities might tell us something, like they might say, let us handle if they have to go interview a clergy person or something, they might not want us to make the first step. Is that correct? They might want to talk to that person first themselves?
Absolutely. We have to be very careful dealing with the authorities, the prosecutor, the police. We can't be involved with any kind of obstruction of justice. That's very important. And so if we report it to them and they tell us, don't do anything for a week, we won't do anything for a week. We allow that process to go forward.
But the nice part about that is from working together is that the prosecutor's office responds very quickly, and there really isn't a big time lag that I mean, they will tell us quickly what we should do or not do, and that's been a marvelous working agreement. Maureen and Steve, okay, so we got that understanding, I think. Now, sometimes talk to me about the victim. You know, we said you're welcome to come to the review board. Sometimes victims might say yes, no. Are there times when they might be, I can't say shy, but hurt, and maybe we have to handle it in a different way?
Yeah, that's a quantum leap for some victims. People who have been hurt and who perceive the hurt as the fault of the church. So now we're asking them to come into a church building and sit with the team. Many come, but many will say, I'm not ready to do that. It takes a lot of courage for someone who's been a victim of sexual abuse to come forward and talk about their story. So there are some instances where we will invite a victim to come and sit with you and me privately. Obviously, this is all done in a very confidential manner. And then we will take the story of the victim to the board. Sometimes it develops that in the telling of the story, the victim is freed up a little bit more, and he or she will say, you know what, I will come to the board. I'll come and tell my story. Now I feel I can do that. So it can work either way.
And we actually offer them options. If someone's been hurt by a clergy person, let's say a priest, sometimes they might have a little hard time talking to a priest. So therefore, you might go with someone else to see them. Just so that people know there's so many different options of how we can handle this, always with their ease and always without prayer and compassion, which I think is what we really try to do as best as we possibly can. We mentioned that the board, this review board that we have, meets always once a month to kind of make sure we're on the same track and we keep moving along. Does the board stay together forever, or do we sometimes have to say, how about some new folks every so often? Has that been kind of written in, so to speak, or are we still in a process of making sure that the good people we have are going to lead us until we can make sure we're in a good spot, to help everybody?
And they are good people.
Yeah.
The policy says that they are appointed for a period of 5 years, and that is renewable. So we haven't yet reached that juncture.
How about our bishop? And I know Bishop Smith is very, very compassionate toward the work that we do and very supportive, and certainly supportive of victims. Does the bishop come to the board meetings all the time, or never, or whenever we want him, or whenever he wants us?
He's always welcome, and he knows that. And yes, it is not unusual for him to come to a board meeting. And there are times, in fact, just recently, we said, we really need you to come down tonight. And he's very affirming of the board members, and he's very grateful to the board members for the time and the effort that they put into promulgating the policy of the Diocese of Trenton.
And can people see the bishop if they want to?
Absolutely. Our bishop is very accessible, and we always offer the victim the opportunity to meet with the bishop. Not all victims are interested in meeting with the bishop. As you mentioned earlier, some victims won't even meet with the priest. But that opportunity is offered to people.
Now, we did talk about the victim being invited to the review board. Is the accused ever invited to the review board?
Yes, that's part of the due process that was instituted with the charter. We want to make sure that the accused has a chance to tell his side of the story. Whenever the accused is invited, he is allowed to bring a lawyer, a civil lawyer and or a canon lawyer. We also tell the accused, just as we would anybody else in a civil setting, that he has a right not to come, and that if he chooses not to come, that won't be held against him. But it's, I think, important for the board to get a well-rounded view of the entire incident, and they can best do that if they hear from both sides.
Now, let's say the board is in process. Maybe a victim has come in and talked to the board. Maybe the accused has come in and talked to the board. Now what does the board do?
The board is like a jury. The board is like a jury that then deliberates. And there is
For many hours sometimes.
there's what I would call a full and frank exchange of views. And because we have people who are very experienced in these types of matters, and by these types of matters I mean situations where you have differences of opinion. We have judges who have sat on trials. We have former law enforcement officers, for instance. We have psychologists. So we have people who are experienced in dealing with human drama. They all come in with their opinions. Each one has had a chance to view the victim, view the accused, and we discuss it. We discuss it and come up with what we think is an appropriate solution. Not that any of these things can be solved, but an appropriate recommendation anyway. And then we make that recommendation to the bishop.
And then from that recommendation, we still continue our work. In other words, even though a recommendation could be made, victim-wise, we still share time and willing to meet with the victim, or sometimes the victim's family if we have to do such a thing, and do our very, very best to make sure that their rights are there, that their counseling is there, and hopefully that they understand that the church is really, really, really always trying to bring about that healing that we spoke about. Are there times when maybe it's hard to ascertain what would have happened, 35 years ago, or, I mean, we've had cases like that, no? That things have happened a long time ago.
It's always hard. It's always hard. None of these decisions are easy. In fact, some of the times it's impossible to make a decision. You do the best that you can. I think that's the watchword. We do the best we can in any given situation. But you're right. I mean, we have had a case, for instance, where somebody has come in and said that there was an abuse situation that happened in the 1950s. So we're talking 40, almost 50 years ago. And to determine exactly what happened 50 years ago is almost impossible. But what you can do is you can listen, and it's important to listen, and we do that.
Thanks very much. If you'd like to contact any one of us, myself, Monsignor Walter Nolan, 924-1743, extension 108, or Maureen Fitzsimmons, 747-9660, extension 110. You may also get us on the website. Please pray with us, and we pray with you, and know that we try to bring about the best we can with the healing that's so, so needed.